Good evening, everybody. This is Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight, we'll have the honor and privilege of interviewing progressive powerhouse and friend, Tim Canova. With that, let me go ahead and bring on Tim. Tim, thank you for joining us at Real Progressive, sir.
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks.
So let me ask you a question. You've obviously taken the mantle with many of us in the progressive movement. You've become a bit of a leader. You've become an icon for many of us, showing us that it's okay to take on the establishment. And, one of the things that really jumped out at me was, I didn't know you, quite frankly, before Bernie Sanders. And I know that you had really gotten propelled into national spotlight going against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, as I call her. Tell me, what happened there? Can you tell us a little bit about your election run and the support or lack thereof with Bernie? And just tell us your experience, sir.
Sure. It was a great experience. And it really traces back to a year and a half ago, I should say, when I started to get increasingly active with the Citizens Trade Campaign, lobbying against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We were lobbying the entire Florida congressional delegation, and Wasserman Schultz was really the least responsive of the entire delegation. Her office was the least responsive, and we were disappointed that she was the only Florida Democrat in the House delegation to vote to fast track the agreement. And that got a lot of us looking at her record and feeling that these kinds of Democrats should be challenged in the primaries, particularly because these are very safe seats. Many of the seats in the country, congressional seats, are very safe. And if they don't have a primary challenger, then there's not much of a democracy. There's not really any accountability. So throughout the fall of 2015, I had a number of folks here who I'm close with who were putting the bug in my ear to jump in and run against her. And I really put the decision off. I'm a law professor. I waited until the fall semester was over before making any firm decision. And it was really a year ago, it was last December, when Wasserman Schultz and her DNC locked Bernie Sanders out from access to the van voter database, that I decided I was going to jump in and run against her. And, it was a very interesting time because, loved ones were very encouraging when I told them what I had in mind, which surprised me. I thought everyone would think it was just a crazy mission. But anyone involved, in politics, I reached out to try to get somebody to design a web page and, those kinds of just inexpensive political consultants. And these are people who regularly are involved in representing candidates. And so many of them, hung up the phone very quickly. They didn't want to have anything to do with someone who was going to run against the head of the DNC. But it was last January, early January, the first week of 2016, that I decided to jump in. And, it went pretty well from the beginning. Wasserman Schultz had made herself very hated nationally and even here in South Florida. And, it was like trying to keep a little flame alive and fan it and stoke it into a bigger flame. It started to go viral. We started to get more and more media attention, earned media attention. And in the first, I'd say it was about 3 or 4 months, we raised $1 million. And it was all in small contributions. From the very beginning, I tried to style our campaign after Bernie Sanders' campaign. I had vowed that I wasn't going to take a penny from any corporate interests, from none of the corporate political action committees. I had one consultant, the fellow who did our direct marketing, direct mail pieces, I should say, and he tried to convince me to do call time at the very beginning. And call time, you see a lot of candidates doing it. Almost everybody, it seems. 60 Minutes had an episode which said that most members of Congress, most candidates for Congress are spending 20 or more, 30 or more hours a week in call centers dialing for dollars. And I just said, we're not going to do that. I had a lot of faith that the grassroots would continue to be there for us. And When we raised our first million, it was all in small donations online. And that's around the time when Bernie surprised me. Bernie Sanders endorsed our campaign. That was in the middle of May. And of course, that led to even more money coming in the door, even more media attention, earned media. It was a very surreal moment because up until then, Wasserman Schultz really was all over the cable airwaves, and she had been for years as the spokesperson of the Democratic Party. But in May, you could say she pushed it too far in her vendetta against Bernie Sanders. You might recall she suggested on some cable TV show that Bernie was inciting violence, and this was all part of the controversy about Nevada. And the backlash was so severe that I imagine somebody in the Hillary campaign told Debbie Wasserman Schultz, "You're not going to be on the air for a little while. Just stay off the air." It really created quite a backlash. And within days, Bernie Sanders endorsed me, and suddenly I was all over, Fox and MSNBC and the cable airwaves. So, everything turned upside down at that moment. In addition to, our campaign broke all kinds of records for a congressional campaign in raising small donations online. We ended up raising almost $4 million. I think it was about $3.8 million. And we were very committed to spending it on the ground. We had 4 field offices and an army of field organizers and deputy field organizers and volunteers. And at the peak of the campaign, I couldn't have been more proud of our canvassers, of our army of organizers and volunteers. They were knocking on about 10,000 doors a week and having about 3,000 conversations with voters a week. So it was an exciting campaign. We were speaking truth to power. We were speaking a lot of truth to the powerless as well. And we raised a lot of issues. I think up until our campaign, people thought of Debbie Wasserman Schultz as a good liberal who was tipping the playing field against Bernie Sanders. And really, it was through the course of our campaign that here in South Florida, and I think around the country, people started to see that Debbie Wasserman Schultz was not a good liberal. She was really is a corporate Democrat who's been taking millions of dollars from big Wall Street banks, all kinds of big corporate interests, and pushing for their interests over those of ordinary people in South Florida.
So, Tim, let me ask you a question. Your campaign in Florida, you've got a very diverse community there with retirees, and it's like a whole big melting pot of its own. Speak to me a little bit about the dynamic that's in Florida that might be representative of a national run if you were to ever look at some. What makes the two similar?
Well, I'll tell you, Broward County, where this district lies. This district is a sliver of northern part of Miami-Dade County and the southern part of Broward County. This is the most diverse, one of the most diverse congressional districts in the entire United States when you look at it demographically. We have, I think, close to 50% of registered Democrats are Hispanic and African American combined. We have a small Native American Indian population. It's small, but it's still significant in the issues that they're facing. We have a lot of older folks. We have a lot of millennials, and I should say I'm particularly attuned to this as a professor at a university here, the only law school in the district. And the kinds of issues that the voters are facing, I think, are very similar to the issues that voters face all over the country. This is a very tough job market for many people, and I see it for students at the university level that I come into contact from my teaching, but I also see it for Gen Xers and baby boomers, people who were hit hard by the 2008 financial crisis and really have never really recovered from that crisis. Many of them lost their jobs, have had tough career changes in the years since. Many of them went upside down on their mortgages, lost their life savings, went bankrupt. I think Wasserman Schultz has really represented a smaller and smaller part of the district, really the western part that's very affluent and lost touch quite a bit, I think, with some of the other folks in the district, particularly working folks, middle income people, Hispanics and African Americans in particular. She really lost touch with the kinds of problems that we're facing here.
So what would you say, being that you are obviously running as a Democrat, or ran as a Democrat, what is the difference in your estimation? And this is kind of, I'm being honest here. I want to answer off the cuff. I didn't want to prep you for this. What is your definition of a progressive versus just a corporate Democrat?
Well, it's a great question, and it's one that I was asked quite a lot during the campaign, actually. I'll say that this was a particularly tough race because it's a closed Democratic primary here. So the turnout was very low. They scheduled this for August 30th. Our presidential primary was in the middle of March. So Republicans and Democrats at the state capitol, in the state legislature in Tallahassee, have a shared interest in a closed primary with low turnouts because it favors incumbents. I just wanted to mention that as an important point. A progressive, in my view, I'll say the best way I think I can answer this is to point to our campaign slogan, which is Progress for All. It also happens to be the name of our political organization that we formed after the campaign. Progress for All was a campaign slogan that came out of John Kennedy's 1960 campaign for president, and it's a real New Deal type of slogan. And it's the idea that it's not progressive if it's not progress for all. It's an idea of citizenship that's very universal, that all of us have certain obligations to obey the law, to treat each other properly, to work hard. But we also, as citizens, should have rights. Everyone should. And I think it goes back to, again, the Franklin Roosevelt administration. Near the end of his 12, 13 years in office, he had his 1944 State of the Union address, in which he called for an economic bill of rights. And he listed them as a right to a remunerative job for all, not for some, but for all people. A right for education for everyone, for decent housing, for decent health care, for good public schools and higher education, and even leisure time for everyone. So it's an all-inclusive kind of an idea. When you take a look at corporate Democrats and conventional mainstream Democrats and Republicans, there's not that universal aspect. It's the idea that, well, the market will decide outcomes, and interest groups get to play the game inside the Beltway. And if you're left out in the cold, we'll try to throw you some crumbs, but don't expect to have much equality. I think real progressives, I don't mean your group, our group, real progressives. I just mean genuine progressives, should really embrace an all-inclusive, universal type of an approach to citizenship, to humanity. That, we all breathe the same air. We all have the same basic needs and desires, the same aspirations to succeed. And the federal government should not be getting in the way of that. It should be fostering an environment where everyone can succeed.
Okay, great answer, Tim. So let me ask you another question. I know that many of us, myself included, were mortified at the end there, as it looked like you had a real shot at taking Debbie down, and it seemed like Bernie kind of went like this.
Yeah.
What happened? Are you able to talk about that, or is this something that we just kind of need to let go?
I don't mind talking about it. Bernie's endorsement came out of the blue. I wasn't seeking it. I was running to support his call for revolution. So many people stood up this year in 2016 and did things that were outside of their comfort zones, things that they had never done before. I think hundreds of thousands, really millions of people contributed small donations to political campaigns, Bernie's and mine and many others. Lots of people made phone calls, walked door to door. A lot of people ran for office, like myself, who had never run for an office before. So I'm very proud that I answered his call, and it did feel like a calling to me. And I was very proud to get his endorsement. Of course, I had endorsed him even before I became a candidate. I was very excited about Bernie's campaign. I think a lot of pressure came to bear on Senator Sanders, and it happened during the summer. I thought he was going to go all the way to the convention and take the fight to the convention. My recollection is he had a meeting with President Obama at the White House, and shortly after that, he really started to step back and not take the fight to the convention. And I think at the convention, there was a lot of pressure applied to him. And I imagine carrots and sticks. I've heard through the grapevine that, he had been hoping to become the head of the Senate Budget Committee, should the Democrats, should they have been able to take control of the Senate. Whatever the carrots and whatever the sticks, it was a disappointment to folks here. All of us Bernie Sanders supporters, I mean, we loved him and his campaign. And of course, naturally, we were hoping he'd come and campaign here. It would have been such a thrill. I don't think it made a big difference in the outcome, to tell you the truth. He might have won me some votes. He might have lost some votes. He did not do well in this district in the March primary. He lost to Hillary Clinton by more than a 2-to-1 margin, by more than 38 percentage points, I believe. Now, there's lots of criticisms as to how he ran his campaign in Florida and elsewhere. And I don't want to second guess somebody's campaign. I wasn't in his shoes. He, of course, had limited resources, and maybe it was a question of allocating resources. So again, I'm really not here to criticize his campaign, just to state the facts that he didn't have any field offices in my district. I think he only had one field office for all of South Florida. And we had 4 field offices. So we really outperformed Senator Sanders in this district. And it was disappointing that he didn't come, especially after he had indicated that he expected to be campaigning here for me in South Florida. But again, I think a lot of pressure came to bear on him. It was unfortunate that it was out there, because the local press started to report nothing but, where is Bernie? Why hasn't Bernie come to campaign here? And, it did take up a bit of the oxygen. But, I really can't say that this is why we fell short. I don't believe it is why we fell short. There are a lot of factors that came into play. Again, it was a close primary. If we had another couple of weeks, maybe we would have caught up. And we ran a great race. I'm very proud of the campaign we ran. And, I hope in the future, maybe I'll be able to work with Senator Sanders again. I was on a task force of his in 2011 and 2012. I'm a law professor who's been writing about the Federal Reserve for many, many years, and monetary policy. And in 2011, I was asked by Senator Sanders to serve on an advisory committee on reforming the Federal Reserve. So, my interest in his politics and enthusiasm for his politics goes back a lot of years.
Very good. So, you bring up a great point, and this is something that, as someone from the outside looking in, I often wonder, what role could you have played should you have gotten elected in that race? What role could you have played in terms of both affecting the lives of the people within your district as well as nationally? Because they're two very different things, but you would have had a national role. What would your ability to have affected the lives in your local community have been?
Steve, I was asked this question a lot during the campaign. If you get elected, Tim, what's going to change? What committees do you want to be on? Okay, even if I get my way and I get onto the Financial Services Committee or the Judiciary Committee, and I can try to push for campaign finance reform, and I'm the poster child of what a publicly financed election kind of looks like today. Of course, it's not publicly financed, but it was financed by the grassroots. Even if I had gotten those kinds of committee assignments as a freshman member of the House of Representatives, there's probably very little I could have accomplished in a 2-year term. And I was very aware of that. And when people would ask me, what can we possibly do? Especially in light of what we all know, that the system is very broken. The system is very upside down. That money rules Washington, D.C. And I was very candid that really all that any of us can do, you and me, anyone who's watching this, is to speak the truth, is to give voice to reason and to our aspirations. And presumably, had I won, I would have had a bigger platform to speak the truth. And I think there's not enough truth-telling in Washington, D.C. Too many people in D.C. are career politicians They're making their own deals for their own gains. And unfortunately, it's the American people, I think, that get cut out of that. So, I fell short on August 30th, but we gained a lot. We ran what was probably the most highly visible congressional campaign in the country. And as a result, there are a lot of people who are counting on me and want to keep hearing what I have to say. So, in some ways, that's very similar to what would have happened should I have won. That still really all we can do is speak the truth, try to articulate the kind of agenda that we want and that we need, and I'll keep doing that.
So that brings me to my next point that I wanted to ask. You were extremely critical, and I share in your criticism of Keith Ellison. Can you please talk a little bit about why you didn't see that as a particularly good move and what you think about the Democratic Party as it stands right now?
Yeah. Well, I'll say I wouldn't have used those words to describe my view of Ellison. I wouldn't say I was or am extremely critical of him. When you take a look at members of Congress, he's one of the better ones. He really is. I've been very outspoken that there are a number of people who I like better. That's not to denigrate Ellison. I like Zephyr Teachout. I like Nina Turner. Ellison has come under criticism, not just from me, but from a lot of corners. And I think it's a very tough job that the head of the DNC is going to have. Because of the legacy of Wasserman Schultz, the main way that the DNC raises money seems to be through corporate donations, lobbying donations, right? President Obama in 2008 set down a new rule for the DNC that the DNC would not take any donations from corporate lobbyists. And that was swept aside by Wasserman Schultz a few years later. So here we are. Perhaps it'll be Keith Ellison heading the DNC. We'll see, soon enough in a matter of weeks. And whoever it is, whether it's Ellison or someone else, their main job is going to be to raise money. And the main way they're going to do it is through corporate contributions. That's not changing the party. That's not a game changer. And again, the criticism is less of Ellison than the predicament we're in. Had Bernie Sanders won the race, had he been the incoming president right now, he could have taken his entire donor list, 3 million strong, I believe, and he could have handed it to the Democratic Party and, reimposed the rule that no corporate lobbying donations will be accepted by the Democratic Party. And instead, our party will only accept money in small donations. Bernie raised $280 million, I believe, for his presidential campaign. Well, let's raise several $100 million each and every year through small donations for the Democratic Party. Even if Bernie had fallen short, and I know we're entering the realm of the hypothetical here, but indulge me. I thought during the summer that the only way Debbie Wasserman Schultz would not have gotten booed off the big stage at the convention, and of course she never made it to the big stage, she got booed off the small stage. But I thought the only way she wouldn't have gotten booed off the big stage is if she had literally been handing the gavel to Bernie Sanders and Bernie had become the new head of the DNC. And again, if Bernie were, whether he was the incoming president or a new head of the DNC, presumably his entire fundraising list could become a fundraising list for the Democratic Party. But short of that, and we are far short of that, make no mistake, the head of the DNC has to raise a lot of corporate money, apparently. And, that's a tough job. And it's going to be a tough job for Keith Ellison or whoever gets this job.
Now, I saw a news article, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, but apparently Ellison backed someone in Florida that was not particularly progressive, but was quite the millionaire class. I mean, the antithetical figure that this movement would have typically been pulling behind. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Sure. There was an election for an open councilman seat in the Democratic Party of Miami-Dade County. And it became a crucial election because to qualify to be the head of the state party, the Democratic Party in Florida, one has to be a councilman, a council person. I think chairs and vice chairs might qualify. I'm not an expert at the arcane rules. But this fight for that open seat it was well known that whoever was going to win this seat was going to then become a candidate to be the chair of the Florida Democratic Party. And the two main candidates, the two rivals for this open seat, one was Senator Dwight Bullard, I should say former state senator. He had headed the local party. And Senator Bullard is an African-American and very progressive. I've certainly supported him and admired his position on a lot of issues over the years, particularly things like payday loans, economic fairness and inequality. Dwight Bullard has been there for working folks. And he was running against a multimillionaire real estate developer named Stephen Battelle. Battelle had been close to Wasserman Schultz, but so had most of the political establishment in Florida. Even progressives, you can say. Wasserman Schultz cast a very large shadow for a number of years. So this became the big battle, and Keith Ellison, it was reported, endorsed the multimillionaire Stephen Battelle, whereas our revolution endorsed Dwight Bullard. As it turned out, Battelle did win this contest. He is now running to be state party chair. It's uncertain if Dwight Bullard might even get back into the race. There's a bit of maneuvering. I don't want to go into too many of the details right now. I'll just say my own view on this was I reached out to both candidates, Stephen Battelle and Dwight Bullard, and asked them if they would appear in a public forum. This goes back to my campaign and the frustration that I felt, where people are asked to make decisions, whether it's to vote or to endorse, based on very limited information. Most of the primary battles that occurred on the day of my primary, there was never any debate in these races, whether it was for state legislature, state senate, sheriff's department, you name it. I managed to get one early Sunday morning debate, but it was a unique situation. I just think for a democracy to work properly, you've got to have open public forums and public debates on a regular basis. I think this is what hurt the Democrats badly. The Republicans were showcasing their 17 candidates, whereas the Democrats waited 2 full months after the Republican debate started before the Democrats even had one debate for the presidential candidates. And I think Hillary Clinton wanted only 2 debates. Wasserman Schultz suggested 4 debates. It turned out they had 6 debates, which is still a paltry number of debates compared to the Republicans in 2016 and the Democrats in 2008. And to add insult to injury, Wasserman Schultz came out with this edict that if anyone, like Bernie Sanders, participated in an unsanctioned debate, then they would be disqualified from participating in any of the DNC debates. And you recall that Bernie, out of frustration, I think, for the small number of debates, had suggested that maybe he would debate Donald Trump, maybe he would debate Rand Paul. So, the idea that the Democratic Party is going to have these processes that are very closed and not transparent and very few public forums and debates is something that has rankled me. And I reached out to the candidates that in the Miami-Dade County race that you alluded to try to foster a public forum. It didn't happen. We're now trying to set up a public forum for candidates for the Florida Democratic Party chair.
So, Tim, this brings me to my next question for you. I very, very excited to have gotten to talk to you when you were setting up Progress for All. Tell me, what is Progress for All?
Progress for All is a federal political action committee and state committee. It's really community action that it's centered towards. And I don't mean to beat up on our revolution. I'm just saying this is a contrast. We're not a 501c4, and we have voluntarily said that we will only take small donations. We will not take undisclosed, unlimited donations, and we will not take corporate PAC money. That's a pledge I made as a candidate, and most candidates can't make that pledge. I was able to make that pledge because there was so much grassroots support for me, for my candidacy, mainly to unseat Wasserman Schultz. And that's a gift horse that a gift the universe gave me that I was very grateful for. That it meant that I could be completely independent of special interests, and that on whatever the issue, I could be putting what I considered to be the public interest ahead of whatever special interests we're lobbying for. So that's the way Progress for All is set up, just the way the campaign was. And we're committed to a progressive agenda and to supporting progressive candidates. So we endorsed a few candidates. Some of them lost, some of them won. At the congressional level, we gave some minor support near the end to Nanette Barragan in California. She won a very close race. She's a great progressive. I'm very excited that she won that race. At the local level, we weighed in my hometown here, Hollywood, Florida. There was a mayor's race, and it was a nonpartisan race. I think there were 4 people in the race on November 8th, a Republican and 2 or 3 Democrats. Wasserman Schultz did robocalls for a very establishment Democrat. I did robocalls for a first-time candidate insurgent Democrat who won, and he won big. So we're very proud that there have been a few races we have intervened. We have tried to make a difference, and we have been able to. But it's much more issue-oriented, I think, than candidate-oriented. And there are a number of issues we've been active on. We were very active speaking out against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the issue that got me into this race to begin with. And of course, we know we're all very fortunate, I think, that the lame duck Congress does not seem to did not vote up or down on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now we're active in pushing for a series of statewide referendums for 2018. And that's an expensive, difficult task, which requires money and organization. And yet, because of the way Republicans dominate in Tallahassee at the state legislative level, the referendum might be the only way to get progressive reforms. In this past election cycle, Florida voters voted for medical marijuana. You need a 60% vote statewide to get any amendment passed, any referendum passed. And I believe the medical marijuana referendum got about 70% support. I strongly supported it throughout my campaign. Wasserman Schultz was against medical marijuana 2 years ago. She never came out for it this time around. So, on issue after issue, Wasserman Schultz was always on the wrong side of the issues because she always had to check whether her corporate donors had a vote. And one of the issues where she started to flip-flop near the end, of course, was fracking. I don't know if you recall that, but I came out very strongly for a statewide ban on fracking. Wasserman Schultz was against the statewide ban. She said fracking was something that could be regulated. And the backlash, I think she felt so quickly that within 3 or 4 days of her making that statement, she did a complete 180 turnaround and called for a statewide ban on fracking. So now we're trying to get that statewide ban. Progress for All is working hard on that. And we're trying on 2 different levels. One, we have support in the state legislature, a Republican and a Democrat introducing legislation to ban fracking in the state of Florida. I should say fracking is particularly dangerous in the state of Florida, but really almost anywhere. We have a large aquifer, and if we start polluting our drinking water, the EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, just came out with a report finally after 5 years of study that concluded that, yes, fracking may actually contaminate drinking water, something that really anyone who's watched Josh Fox's Gasland movies would already have been convinced, I believe. And again, getting this legislation through Tallahassee, very difficult, so we're working for a statewide referendum to ban fracking. We are also standing up against the Sable Trail Pipeline, which is a natural gas pipeline that's over 500 miles long from Alabama through Georgia into northern and central Florida. It has been, this pipeline is to transport fracked gas, so it helps to expand fracking, probably in Alabama and Georgia more than in Florida. But then the gas, it's uncertain, but it certainly seems that the end game is to have liquefied natural gas export facilities. So the prospect that we could be contaminating our drinking water in Florida so that we can export gas to China or elsewhere, and I suppose we're going to then have to import drinking water from somewhere else in the world. You know, people are tired of this. And again, this is an issue where the people are way ahead of the politicians. The people of Florida voted in 2 different referendums this year for solar energy. And in the second referendum, there was a big propaganda campaign by the private electric utility companies to try to fool the voters, and the voters, they saw through it. So we have done what we need to introduce solar power on a much wider scale in Florida. And of course, it's Governor Rick Scott and the state legislature that will continue to drag their heels. So, you know, Progress for All has a very ambitious agenda. In addition to those referendums, the fracking ban referendum, and in addition to standing up against the Sable Trail pipeline, we're also pushing for some political reforms through referendums. We'd like to have open primaries in the state, and we're beginning to partner with groups that have been pushing for open primaries all over the country for a number of years. We'd like to have election integrity reforms where voters can have more transparency in the process, where the ballots are verifiable, so that it would be paper ballots that are counted by hand in public and reported at the precinct level. This is how it's done all over Western Europe. We have plans for a referendum to overturn felony disenfranchisement, which disenfranchises an awful lot, a high percentage of African American, Latino, and Native American, mostly men, but even increasingly women, because of this misguided drug war. The collateral effects seem to fall on people of color much more than on white folks, especially people who come from upper middle class and those kinds of backgrounds. So, you know, the drug war has been a disaster. It's left to big disenfranchisement in the state of Florida. So we've got a whole lot of reforms we're trying to push through referendums, and we need support. So we're beginning to reach out, ask folks to go to our website at progressforall.org to contribute small amounts if they can, to share the site, to spread the word, and to stay engaged on these issues. We can't afford to just become awake, get active every 4 years. I think that's one of the lessons that comes out of 2016. We should be encouraged. Millions of people woke up this past election cycle, and it was thanks to Bernie Sanders and thanks to a lot of progressive efforts all over the country. People have to stay awake. They have to stay engaged. And 2018 will be here before you know it. These referendums might be on the ballot in Florida by 2018. To get them on the ballot, it's going to require money and petition drives. So I urge everybody who's watching, go to progressforall.org and spread the word, please.
So let me ask you, it brings me to the next 2 points, and I'll let you in. We'll close with these 2. First thing is that I understand that you're going to be at Occupy Inauguration in January?
Yes. I was invited to speak there, and I agreed. So I haven't made my reservations yet, but I am hoping to be there indeed.
That's great. All right. Well, I'll get to see you then. That's awesome. Real Progressive is one of the co-sponsors of this event, so I'm very excited about that.
Looking forward to seeing you.
I guess the last piece, are you going to run against Debbie Wasserman Schultz? Are you going to do it again? Is there going to be a Rocky Part 2? Are you going to do it?
It very well might happen. I was interviewed recently and asked the same question and said that I'm seriously considering it. You know, when you take a look at how this presidential election turned out, it has Wasserman Schultz's fingerprints all over this disaster, and right up to the end. You know, the election was on Tuesday, November 8th. 3 days before, on that Saturday evening, Wasserman Schultz was being interviewed. It was broadcast on HBO's Vice News. So she's got a 5-minute softball interview 3 days before the election, an election in which Hillary Clinton needs a lot of those Bernie Sanders supporters to vote for her. What does Wasserman Schultz do? She denounces Bernie Sanders supporters for demonizing her. You know, it just showed incredible arrogance and overconfidence and stupidity, quite frankly. I suppose they were expecting Hillary to win, and Wasserman Schultz was hoping to have some kind of a White House appointment. It didn't occur to her that lashing out at Sanders supporters on the eve of the election might be bad for the Democratic Party. Everything about Wasserman Schultz has been bad for the Democratic Party. You know, since she became the head of the DNC, the Democrats are at the weakest point they've been at in 83 years, I believe. The Republicans have an enormous majority in the House of Representatives, historic majorities at state houses and governorships. And, you know, Wasserman Schultz should have been fired from the DNC after the 2014 election fiasco. She should have been fired after the WikiLeaks revelations. Instead, she was elevated to what? An honorary co-chair of Hillary Clinton's campaign. You know, she is a symbol of everything that's wrong with this party. She needs to be replaced. And I must say that I am warming up to the idea of running again. I don't need to make a decision right away. I'm considering it. A lot of folks are encouraging me to do it. For now, I can delay the decision and be very engaged with Progress for All. We're doing some good stuff with Progress for All.
So, just from my perspective, Tim, I wanted to say this. Number one, I can't support the Democratic Party as it stands right now. I'm trying. So I've been a Democrat for some time, and I look at Donna Brazile. I look at Chuck Schumer. I look at Nancy Pelosi. I look at all the things that they, after, in lieu of everything you've seen, I look at them doubling down on Russians, on this, on that. When are they going to look in the mirror and say, we don't represent regular people, we represent wealthy donors, and you know what, until we change, we're going to be in the wilderness. When are they going to wake up, Tim? You provide me hope that they may listen at some point. That's where that's why you represent something so much more than just that small section of Florida. You represent a possible coup d'etat, a possible resurgence of progressivism within the party. Well, I don't see a lot of it, Tim. I'm hoping I'm wrong. Am I?
I'm pretty much in agreement with your sentiment, you know, and to the degree that I represent that kind of a hope, it's really because there's, you know, 200,000 people out there who donated to my campaign and thousands who made phone calls and hundreds who knocked on doors for me. You know, the grassroots movement is what presents a challenge to the Democratic Party. The establishment of the Democratic Party is not going to change willingly. They're going to blame the Russians, they'll blame the FBI, they'll blame Bernie Sanders supporters, anyone but themselves. The fact is, the Democratic Party in the last 20 or 30 years has moved so significantly to the right that it has pushed the Republican Party even further to the right. This is the politics of triangulation. It has been a big failure. The last two Democratic presidents have been to the right of probably Richard Nixon and Dwight Eisenhower. That's how far the spectrum has shifted to the right. We need to push the Democratic Party back to its progressive roots. Look, there was a 3-year period where I registered for no party affiliation. After being a lifelong Democrat, I had been so disgusted in the Democratic Party and how corporate it had become. Bernie Sanders and his challenge to the party helped ignite a fire. It got a lot of folks like me back engaged in the Democratic Party. I believe now's the time to fight for the Democratic Party. It can't be the same old Democratic Party we've seen for the last 20 years. It's got to be a return to progressive roots. If we fail in that struggle, I do think there will be a third party that will rise. But I hope we don't fail in that struggle. You know, I didn't run as an independent this go around. I've got folks saying, well, you should have run as an independent. You should run for U.S. Senator or governor as an independent. All I know is what was in front of me. The task that was in front of me was to try to bring down the head of the Democratic National Committee and to articulate a progressive vision and agenda for the Democratic Party. And I'm going to continue to try to do that for now.
Tim, thank you very much for your time. This was an incredible opportunity. I love talking to you.
Thanks, Steve.
Maybe next time we can delve into some other topics. I hope I get it next time. Please come.
Steve, I love speaking with you. The first time we met, it was just in a living room, and we talked about modern monetary theory. And I think at the Occupy inauguration, there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about. There's going to be Trump's fiasco of an infrastructure agenda, which sounds like it's more privatization than anything else, and how will it be financed? That opens up a whole range of discussion for you and I to have, I'm sure. And it's always a pleasure to be on with you, and I hope this is the first of many discussions.
Absolutely. Tim, you're a good friend, and I really appreciate your time. Everybody, thank you for Tim Canova joining us. With that, we're signing off. Thank you so much, sir. Have a good night. Thank you, everybody.